Hello, this is Prom Programs and Outreach Director Willard Watson, and today we're going to listen to an interview that I did with our curator Diana Cameron and artist Bob Trotman. Bob was born in Winston-Salem, North Carolina in 1947. He received a Bachelor of Arts degree in philosophy from Washington and Lee University, and for 42 years he's maintained a studio in the foothills of Western North Carolina. Self-taught in art, he has received 2 National Endowment of the Arts grants and 4 grants from the North Carolina Arts Council, and his work is in collections across the country. Working mostly in wood, he sees his efforts in relation to the vernacular traditions of carved religious figures, ship's figureheads, and the so-called show figures found outside shops in the 19th century. However, as a contemporary artist, Trotman wants to mobilize this tradition to satirize and elaborate posturings of power, privilege, and pretense that secretly or not so secretly shape the world we live in. The recent addition of motion, light, and sound intensifies the viewing experiment, leading, he hopes, to a rueful contemplation of the play of power and its attendant ironies. Joining us.
Good morning. Good morning.
Hey Bob, this is Diana Cameron. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. We really appreciate
Hey, sure. Happy to do it.
So, Bob, how did you start working with wood? And was there anyone particular that taught you?
No, I did start, but nobody in particular taught me. I started on my own. I decided I was going to do it. I had, in 1973, when I was 24, 25, I had been an English teacher, which was a deferment for the draft to get out of Vietnam. So I did that as long as I could. And when I was clear of Vietnam, I moved to the country and took up woodworking because it sounded like a good idea, and I'd liked working with wood in 8th grade shop. And so we bought some land in the country, and I decided to become a craftsman.
Oh, that's cool. Now, was all of this in North Carolina?
Yes, it was. I'm from Winston-Salem originally, and I had lived outside the state in Virginia and Illinois, and then moved back to the state at that point.
That's great. And Bob, this question can be related to what you're working on now, as well as how your work has developed over time. But would you consider your work more functional or more sculptural, or do you work in a combination of the two?
No, it's sculptural.
Purely sculptural.
Yeah, I started off as a functional person.
Okay.
I started off making furniture and wooden objects, which were functional.
How long did you do that before you transitioned?
I did it till 1997.
Okay.
So let's see, 24 years of functional work.
And was this generating income for you for the furniture?
Yes, it was. It was. But the sculpture generates income too. It doesn't generate much now, but it is generated. It's not like the sculpture did not generate income.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I made more money as a sculptor than as a furniture maker. So it's not an either or thing.
Oh, definitely. I just thought it was interesting just for your beginnings, if you...
Well, my beginnings, I really had not had much exposure to art. So my wife was an art history major, so gradually I got filled in from her on art history. And, I've done a lot of, I guess I'd say I'm self-taught. Well, I definitely would say I'm self-taught. So I've learned, art history and such other things, and proceeded as a craftsman and furniture maker for 24 years, and then decided to stop doing that and devote myself entirely to sculpture. Actually, I'd done sculpture and furniture during that 24 years, so the sculpture finally won out.
So that's interesting that you were self-taught and that you began doing kind of furniture and then transitioned more into sculptural work. Now, has North Carolina's history of being a furniture making hub, did that influence your work at all? Or has North Carolina influenced your work at all?
No.
So where have you found your inspiration for your work then, Bob, over time?
I guess in current events, art history, current events, newspaper, advertising, just the stuff that comes across my attention. A lot of movies, films.
Would you be able to expand a little bit on the concepts or your ideas behind the work that you have in the exhibition, Senior Partners?
Yes, those figures were attached to safes, like a fake money safe before. In the last show, which was at the Taubman Museum of Fine Art, or Museum of Art in Roanoke. And they were shown in a show called Business as Usual.
Appropriate.
And that show, I have been showing work for about 15 years as Business as Usual, which is a satirical critique of corporate culture.
That's great.
Okay? And I took those from that show and removed the figures from the safe, since I wouldn't have much context with you. And also I thought, since you offer work for sale and don't take a commission, that I would have a better chance of selling them if I took them off the safe.
Yeah.
So that is why they are in the form that they're in. And also they're small, and the transportation would not have been a problem. And I think I offered you several choices, and those were the ones that you selected.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to have those in the installation. They are kind of in this corner area, and you come across them, and there's almost a humor to them because of their.
Oh yeah, there's definitely I definitely intend there to be humor. Yeah, and I liked your comment that because they've got powerful looks on their faces, but they're small.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Much smaller than you, and they're looking up at the viewer too.
Well, it's interesting how the piece can change, the reception of that can change just with the removal of the safe, because I'm assuming when they were on the safes, they were much taller, probably about twice the size.
No, they were still small. The safe was maybe 2 feet high. So
okay.
The safe was on a riser, and then they were on top of the safe. But the point was more that they had acquired a lot of money, and there they were.
Right.
And it was their money, and they were looking at you like, what are you looking at?
Right. And now
my money, it's mine.
And now when I came across them installed in the gallery, I just laughed because it looked like these two very powerful people just trying to appear powerful looking up.
Well, that's right. That came across, and that was what I intended.
Great.
So a lot of the business as usual work, nearly all of it, has got some humor in it. It's dark, ironic humor, but it's basically about acquiring money and moving the money up the pyramid to the 1%.
Right.
To the people at the top, and too bad for the rest of you.
Right.
Either both in the corporate world and not in the corporate world, because there are a lot of people in the corporate world who that doesn't work out for so well. So anyway, there's not one single narrative that informs the whole thing, but what is going on in the world has changed, and often I'll tie things into current events, and then that event will come and go, and the reference is lost, and then something else will happen, and the sculpture will look like it relates to that.
Yeah, the context.
The context changes, and I try to make things ambiguous enough that they will still have relevance in a way that maybe I didn't intend when I made it, but it still clicks with things that are going on, to me anyway.
Right.
Okay.
Well, yeah, thank you, Bob. And switching gears a little bit. So wood it's often historically associated with men, and we're curious on your thoughts on that, if you think this is still relevant today.
I do not.
Okay.
No, I mean that. Yeah, I agree that. Well, art was historically related to men.
Right.
So, I mean, I can't do much about that. But when I started, Wendy Moriyama was, I showed at the same gallery with her and got to be friends with her pretty near the beginning of my career back in the 70s. So I've always, you know, and Judy McKee, there have always been women who were doing woodwork that I've known of. Maybe not as many as men, but at least from my perspective as a 72-year-old now and not real connected with what's going on, I see that as sort of ancient history.
When do you choose to follow tradition, and when do you choose to experiment within your creative practice?
Well, I don't really think of it that way. I just make that I see my work in the tradition of vernacular wood carving, like ships' figureheads, religious figures in the Renaissance and Gothic era that were displayed in churches, store figures that were displayed outside of shops in the 1800s. But as a contemporary artist, I want to take that tradition and mobilize it of late, the critique of corporate culture. So I'm trying to take a traditional thing and use it for contemporary art purposes. So it's based in tradition, but I don't, well, like right now I'm making a couple of large arms that are 6 feet long from fingertip to shoulder. And the name of the piece it's got 2 large arms that will be out of wood, suspended from the ceiling, and it's called grab, and then in parentheses, from above and from below. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw one of those, actually.
Okay. Okay, well, the idea of the arms comes from Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, from Adam's arm and Adam and God that are reaching out. So that is the traditional element. I am using it, though, grab in terms of Trump talking about grabbing pussy, and the oligarchs in terms of grabbing everything else, which they are trying to deplete all of the public resources in the United States and take it away from the people and have it all to themselves and privatize everything. So that's the grab, or that's grab from above, and the other is the grab from below. But the irony is that they have godlike power like the Sistine Chapel. So I'm using Michelangelo's art to have that mythic godlike power. So that would be an example of using tradition, but for a contemporary inspiration.
Wow.
Okay?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
That's powerful.
So other things, I had another piece that was called Claptocracy, and it was 2 wooden hands clapping that looked like Albrecht Dürer's praying hands that you see on churches all the time. So that would, and they were carved wood, so it looked medieval and religious. They had a signet ring. One of the hands had a signet ring on with the initials M.E., which means me. So they are clapping for 45 or whatever. And there's a big hand reaching down from the ceiling pointing at these 2 clapping hands. And the hand that is pointing at them is a Michelangelo arm, and the hands that are clapping are Albrecht Dürer hands. They're not copied from Albrecht Dürer, but the idea they look like they're either praying or clapping. So I'm trying to play with references to art history or to the news or to things people said. So it's very referential. And the references could lead anywhere, but art history is one of the places that I'm drawing from. And then other things that are in the media. Like some of the white men, I'm just assuming if you looked. I used Michael Bloomberg's face. It's not a portrait of him, but this was long before this was in the 2015, so it was long before he, it was back when he was mayor. But I just liked his face. He has a face that looks very powerful, his stern look. So without naming him or without necessarily making the viewer aware that that was who it was, I used his face. Sometimes I use, I used Joseph Goebbels' face. He was one of Hitler's generals. So I don't necessarily name them. They've just got, bits and pieces I can use.
Yeah, that's really cool that you're drawing from classical pieces in art history and this religious iconography, and then blending it with what's currently happening and what's going on. One thing I think's really interesting about your work is that you are able to have just kind of make things so realistic looking with the details, but also surrealistic in their size and scale.
Yes, and also in the combination of things, like in the combination of the figure and the mechanism in the case of the ones that are kinetic. I like to make it a little or make it jarring and disjointed, so that it takes you back a little bit, but hopefully makes you smile too. So I intend for there to be humor. Do you know like the plays of Bertolt Brecht, like the Threepenny Opera? So anyway, he was a German playwright who did a lot of very dark, satirical plays. So I try to trade in that kind of noir. It's a pretty bleak outlook, but humorous still. Or Peter Bruegel, painter in the Renaissance, who did a lot of pictures. If you know who he was, if that rings a bell, he's an inspiration.
Well, throughout history, there's definitely been this kind of attraction to the grotesque, and you are able to kind of tastefully capture that.
Yeah, I like grotesqueries.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, so moving along, just the next one that we touched on the Historical Association of Men with Woodwork. Now, are there any issues around diversity for wood artists in terms of?
Listen, I couldn't speak for wood artists. For me, that's all I can talk about. Mm-hmm. I am focused on white men because that's where the problem is. I have done sculptures of African Americans, and they are on my website if you want to see them. But I don't want to tackle racial issues or gender issues. Well, I say that I have done it before, but not. I'm not doing that right now. Because if I bring anything up, well, like the senior partner of the two figures you've got, there is a woman there, so that it is a woman. But for the most part, my figures are white men. And it is not because I don't believe in diversity. It's because I do believe in diversity. But I don't portray the world as I wish it were. I portray it as I see it being. So it's the patriarchy, the white men, that is what I'm focusing on. And I'm focusing in a critical way on that.
Oh, yeah, that definitely comes through in your work, just from hearing your explanations about them, but also upon seeing them. And then when you are able to, your titles are also really hit the nail on the head a lot of times. So
right. I suppose I have spoken to audiences of color before, and I was not sure that they didn't think for a minute that I was a white supremacist, which disturbed me. But because I've got 3 huge sculptures called White Men, and I'm not promoting them as, it's not a white supremacy thing. It's a critical of that attitude.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
So I think it kind of harkens back to that grotesque or the surreal aspect, and you capture it in those senior partners. I mean, it's these two diminutive, angry white people looking up at you in their business attire, and yeah, I think that your drive those points home strong in your work.
Well, good. I'm glad that comes across. That's what I intend the senior partners to be. Like you've got it. You got my intention. So I think we're clear on that. So I guess in my normal business as usual show, I turn up the critique a little bit louder than is. It's a little more subtle in what you've got, but that's fine.
Well, Bob, I'm not sure if you'd say that nature, as far as subject matter, is important to your work, but what about material? What are your thoughts on that?
Basswood is my favorite material. So, and nature is not part of my subject matter.
Right.
Only in terms of just general environmental concerns. I have made an occasional piece that, like there's one in my business as usual show called Stain that I don't need to tell you about, but it is about environmental degradation at the hands of corporate power. And in North Carolina, that was Duke Power. The governor was McCrory. And it's basically a hand pump that has no water coming out of it, but the handle does operate. And where the water would be dripping on a piece of wood, there's a stain of what is being pumped up. And underneath all of the thing, it's resting on corporate, several sets of corporate feet. And you can look on the website, on my website, if you want to. So, but that's about as much of a nature reference as I've made. So nature is not part of my imagery or an explicit reference.
And why is basswood your favorite wood to work with?
Like marble would be if I were a stone carver. It's easy to work. It comes in big dimensions. It's bland. It doesn't have much pattern or figure. It takes form and color well. It's like white paper.
Yeah, so you can just do a lot of alterations to it to get exactly what you want. That would make sense for your work in particular.
Right. And I don't want the wood to speak. I want it to be obvious that it's made of wood, but I don't want the wood to speak, in terms of the pattern or the grain or even the color, because I color my pieces.
Now,
and basswood.
On senior partners,
yeah.
Is there a stain for their clothing?
They're painted. They're
okay.
painted. I think I use tempera on them, but I do the paint is thin enough that you can see the wood grain through it. I found casein paint works even better, and that's what I use now. That's milk-based paint. But all the traditional carved figures that were in churches, like we mentioned, my main go-to guy on that. He was a German that lived in the 1400s. Back in the Gothic era, they had polychrome sculptures and monochrome sculptures. And the monochrome sculptures, which are the ones I like, they're brown. They were not unpainted. They were just painted in wood-type colors. The polychrome figures, would have flesh tones for the fleshy parts, and then the clothing would be colored, bright colors. And that I do not do the polychrome. Well, not anymore. I don't do the polychrome. I'm working in monotone things now. But that's since the figures that you've got. So anyway, the ones that you've got are tempera, and they are painted. The golden color of the skin is sort of the natural color of the wood, but there's shading put on the wood to accentuate the details.
That's cool. I wasn't aware of the shading.
But even most of the marble sculptures, I mean, now this is not me, but most marble sculptures, traditional marble sculptures, have also got paint on them.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, you're not just looking at marble.
Right.
They're painted around the eyes, and usually it's a gray color that you're not aware. It just looks like shading.
But so that's interesting.
Like Bernini or Michelangelo, they put paint on their sculptures.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not painted like the Greeks supposedly did full color.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, and they look awful.
Yeah, very gaudy.
Very
Yeah. And so the monochrome treatment is still painted, but it looks like it's made out of a certain material, and that's kind of the look I'm going for now. So the big arms that I was telling you about, grab, that I'm making now, they're both brown, but they have got burnt sienna is the main coloring, and then you see a little bit of the golden basswood in the highlights through the burnt sienna, and then the dark shadows are raw umber or combinations of that. So there's a lot of paint, and I spend a lot of time working on the coloring. But it's just more subtle and subdued, and a layperson probably would not be aware that they had paint on them. Mm-hmm. You know, they just look like brown wood.
Right.
Yeah, I was just curious if you came to basswood as because of how light it is and the scale of your work.
Light in weight or in color?
In weight.
Yeah, it's not that light. It's not like balsa wood.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar? Have you ever?
Oh, I'm familiar with basswood. Yeah.
Okay.
I just asked about that. My great grandpa, Willard Watson I, was a toy carver around the Boone area, and he used basswood all the time. That was his favorite wood to use because it was so soft and it was lightweight.
Yes, it is. Well, like the arms that I was telling you about, they weigh about 90 pounds each, wow. Which is not light. I mean, I have a hard time picking those up, and suspending them from the ceiling. They've got some weight on the. I use monofilament marlin fishing line, and it pulls. The monofilament's rated for 450 pounds break strength. So if I've got a 90-pound arm suspended by two filaments, that's 45 pounds on each one. So it's, I've got plenty of wiggle room in terms of it supporting the weight. But if they were oak, say, or a heavy wood like that, they might weigh 2/3 more. They might weigh 150 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that difference, but it's not light like balsa wood. But basswood is it cuts like butter. It's very easy to work, as marble is easy to carve. You wouldn't make a sculpture out of granite, or most people wouldn't. They're soft or light or heavy visually, so there's no point for me in torturing myself with heavy, difficult to cut wood.
Mm-hmm.
Poplar is a close second to basswood, but poplar is not. It's got weird colors that have to be painted over, and it doesn't work as easily as basswood. And for the most part, the time of making the thing is much more expensive than the material. So I buy the wood that I like, and just work on it for a long time and make it as good as I can. And so I get basswood, which comes, I guess basswood's available in the mountains, but I think most of what I get comes from the Midwest. It's colder, it grows in colder regions than North Carolina. So I order, you know, $4,000 or $5,000 worth at once, and then that lasts me for a long time. A big truck brings it. I don't go out and gather the wood.
Right.
Yeah, that make it a lot harder.
It comes in 4-inch thick timbers. So I do glue the pieces together. But normally what I do is I make drawings, and then I can figure out exactly from the drawings, top view, side view, front view, looking at all the views, I can calculate how to cut the wood to step it off in layers to get exactly what I'm planning to carve. So I know exactly what I'm going to carve before I begin. And often I make a clay maquette first, too. So there's very little guesswork.
That's great.
Sometimes I change the positioning of the object once I've got it made. Like these two arms, I have not really definitively decided how I'm going to hang or display them. I think I know, but I'm going to do that experimentally once I've got one of them done, and the second one is winding up. So they will be displayed together eventually.
Great.
Yeah, when you're dealing with such scale, precision is very important.
Well, it is, but I think it would be more important if I was dealing on a small scale. At least this way, they're big enough that I can see what I'm doing without my eyes are getting not so good. Mm-hmm. And having it big, the details are, you do have to do a lot of detail, but at least the details are of a size that I can do them and see them.
Do you like to do one piece at a time, or do you kind of have like a series that you're developing, or?
I wouldn't call it a series. I usually call it a body of work, and I'm still in the business as usual body of work, but that's been going on for 10 or 15 years. But I'm not. But I do have several pieces that I work on at once, so that I can, when I need to glue something or wait, or if something messes up and I have to order something, I can put that aside and work on something else. Sometimes one of those things that I might be working on is drawing. It might be brainstorming for a new piece, detailing or the painting of a piece that's nearly done. So yeah, it works a lot better to have a lot of stuff going at once. And the arms that I'm working on, I've been working on for more than a year. So that's one you know, to the time it moves slowly,
mm-hmm.
which is okay with me.
Yeah. Now, with your, like, for breaking up kind of the time of doing a project, you said you do a lot of mock-ups to begin with, like sketches and then the clay model, before you start actually working with the wood. So
yeah,
which part takes the longest for you?
Working with the wood. The maquettes, I'm relying more on photography now. Those arms that I was telling you about, I did make one maquette. I'm doing it more with taking views or setting up, either getting somebody to pose for me or posing myself. In this case, I just needed to find my arm. But do pretty extensive photography with good lighting, so the shadows show up the muscles, and then photograph from above, from each side, from below, from the end of my hand, so I've got every possible view. And then I can take those photos, put them in a projector, and project them up to the size of the sculpture, and then redraw those, like starting with my own, and buff it up to the Michelangelo arm, which I would do in the stage of drawing, but with looking at the Sistine Chapel paintings and seeing how Michelangelo changed the anatomy to make the look that he made. So all of that could take, I'd say in this case, 3 weeks or a month to do that part. I spend a lot of time on the preparation. I really do want to know exactly what I'm going to make, and the little figures that you've got there, there are detailed drawings that I made for them before I began to even cut the wood.
That's cool.
And they both had clay models too. So I used to feel impatient to get to the wood, like the wood was the real part, but not so much anymore. I see the preparation for the wood carving as being part of the work itself too. And then I've got the drawings, which I show, and the maquettes, which I can sell. So it's all part of the, and display too. It's all part of the process that the finished sculpture and then all of the preparation work too is occasionally shown and sold.
Great. Well, I don't have any more questions. Willard, do you have any thoughts or?
I don't. I just thank you, Bob, for taking us through your process. And
Sure.